Thank you so much for all coming today. Are you from out of town, or are you from Washington, D.C. area?
A little bit of both.
A little bit of both, but you all care deeply about manufacturing. And from Mongolia. Well, you're important. You're very important. I'd be honored. First of all, thank you for all coming. Obviously, there are 435 members of the House, 100 senators. We all come from different regions. I come from what is probably the most robust automotive manufacturing platform between Toledo and Cleveland. We have the major Jeep, Fiat, Chrysler facility manufacturing the Wrangler. We go all the way to Fort Avon Lake, heavy trucks, over to Brook Park, Ohio, in Cuyahoga County, just outside of Cleveland, which has the Ford EcoBoost engine. And the Cruise vehicle, which is Chevy GM, is largely made. It's a northern Ohio car, starting in Defiance, Ohio, Toledo, Ohio, ending up in Parma, Ohio, and then Lordstown, Ohio. So we have quite a heavy manufacturing footprint, not just the assembly plants, but all of the respective parts plants. Just down the road from the district I represent is our Abrams tank facility at Lima, Ohio. And the rail industry is the 5th largest in the country. I represent all the ports on the Great Lakes, in Lake Erie, I should say, and co-chair the Great Lakes Coalition here in the House of Representatives. We're on the Senate side now. But that gives you a little flavor. That's just some of the companies that I represent. And manufacturing is our lifeblood. Most of the machine tool manufacturing in our country exists within 300 miles of my home. And so we have lived, and some have died, fighting for the manufacturing prowess of our country. I wanted to thank Senator Kerry. Has he already been here? My Keystone colleague and the Century Foundation, Michael Goff, of the Northeast Midwest Institute, and the AFL-CIO, and all the policy and jobs experts and representatives from manufacturing for inviting us to be with you today. The challenge that we face, and I'm speaking as our country, on jobs and wages is not just theoretical. It is not just some policy question that we debate here in Washington. It's for real, and it's for real Americans, as we learned in the election of 2016, where manufacturing and making America great again resonated very strongly in our region. And we can think about Senator Casey. We can think about Pennsylvania. We can think about myself, Ohio, Michigan, Indiana, where our new vice president is from, Wisconsin. We can think of some of the election results that some Americans in Washington and maybe elsewhere were surprised at. I wasn't surprised at all. If you listen to the rhetoric of the campaign and what was happening at the street level. Our immediate challenges on jobs are vast, but not without solutions. And let me just begin with the issue of trade, which is an extraordinarily important one. I think the first bill ever introduced in the House when the Congress was created dealt with trade. So this is not a new issue. But we have to make sure that the trade deals that the United States is a part of works for everyone, and that our heritage of a rule of law and democratic principles, that's with a small d, are embedded as central parts of those agreements. These massive and opaquely negotiated global deals have often favored certain very powerful interests over communities, over workers, over smaller companies, and for a quarter century now, over 25 years, our country has not yielded positive trade balances. I'm sure you all know that last year alone, we were over $500 billion in deficit. That has been happening for over a quarter century. And that deficit, that annual deficit, that monthly deficit is felt in places such as I represent, in companies being closed, in workers having their jobs outsourced, and often having to train their replacement workers going to the new host country. Can you imagine what that might feel like? It is unclear to us at this moment whether this administration can produce the kind of trade reform that is effective for companies, for workers, and for communities, but we must hold them accountable to the promises that they made in places like Ohio. America must adopt a set of keystone principles on trade that should guide what we do, because America is first not a business. America is first a political principle embodied in our Constitution. And so I believe in free trade among free people. I believe in free trade with nations that operate by a rule of law that is enforceable. I believe that the proposal by the President to renegotiate NAFTA gives us an opportunity to fix the trade model that we have been working with. And I'm committed, along with many of my colleagues, to do everything we can to make sure that our companies and workers and representatives of our communities and states, that their voices are heard as we renegotiate. Our very first step, I believe, should be an easy one, and that's passing a bill that I have authored in the House, H.R. 2766, the Balancing Trade Act. My bill is simple. It requires the administration to create a concrete plan to address any trade deficit with any country with which we hold such a deficit if that deficit has totaled $10 billion a year or more for 3 consecutive years. And it asks the executive branch to go back and say, hey, take that apart. Why is that? What isn't working so that we can finally rebalance our trade accounts? If the United States has a persistent trade imbalance with a nation, a new trade relationship must be negotiated to end this perpetual imbalance. And I might remind you that $1 billion of deficit translates into now about 5,000 lost jobs in our country. Jobs transplanted elsewhere or jobs that just magically appear somewhere else. But a $500 billion deficit, if you multiply 500 by 5,000, you'll be surprised at the total that you get. And that's just in 1 year of lost jobs. I recently testified before a panel assembled by the Secretary of Commerce, Wilbur Ross, to expedite the investigation into the state of just one industry, the state of the steel industry, as a national security matter. Secretary Ross told us that they are moving at Commerce fast and hope to have something by the end of June. I was really pleased to hear that. This could produce real relief and action for our American steel industry, whose downturn is caused by massive foreign dumping, especially by China and South Korea, and probably by Russia, in very unfair trade practices. And I might mention that I represent U.S. Steel, which has announced plant closures in Lorain, Ohio. I'm very close to ArcelorMittal, Republic operated in the district that I represent. So the steel industry is intertwined with the automotive industry very directly. American companies cannot compete against state-run or subsidized corporations. And it can't compete against countries that continually dump and do not play by the rules. I've had situations where I had to go to the floor of Congress in order to get relief for one of my companies because they had delivered steel product to one of the East Asian nations that refused to pay the bill. Can you imagine? And it took me months and months and months and visits with the ambassador and so forth. So we have a global problem of overproduction of steel, particularly in China. Warehouses are full of it. And what do you do when you have warehouses full in a country that does not operate in a free market system, where every governor thinks that they'll get reelected or they'll gain favor if they just put up another steel company, manufacture it, and then store it because they can't sell it anymore. So you get some of your money back by dumping it. We expect that that case is going to prove that when the Department of Commerce makes its ruling. In my district, Lorain, Ohio, and I suggest you go to the website and Google them, used to have tens of thousands of steel jobs. And we recognize the role of robots, we recognize the role of energy efficiency, we recognize all of that. But now we fear the industry will vanish entirely from this job-battered town. And with the loss of these high-paying quality steel jobs and other manufacturing jobs related to that, Northern Ohioans have experienced a drop in annual wages since the 90s of $7,000 of effective buying power. Now you think about a political revolution across this country. When that's happened to enough people, It creates a very unstable situation politically. It creates, for both of our political parties, Republican and Democrat, these urges to go independent, to do whatever, because those parties aren't making your life better. It is a very serious question for us here in our nation. The experiences of places like Lorraine are not unique. Too many American workers, especially those from our Great Lakes Midwest region, have faced this economic drop, which really feels to them like the earth is crumbling underneath their feet and their families. It's hard for Washington, D.C. to understand that, because this is a government complex where most of the jobs, whether they be in the government or serving the government, are here protected in the domain of the capital. But when you get out into free market America, it is a very different story. And believe it or not, I've had members of Congress say to me after this recent election, and I've been saying this for many, many years here in the Capitol as though no one would hear me about the condition of manufacturing, what was happening with the trade deficit. People have now said to me, as a result of the last election, oh, Congresswoman, maybe we should come to places like Ohio and do some hearings and just spend some time. And I thought, where have you been? Where have you been? No elected official can expect families to survive on jobs that pay a fraction of what they used to. Certainly in the district I represent now, people are being hired at $12 to $17 an hour, made to work 6 days a week or 6.5 days a week. They burn out. Even the young people burn out. They don't want to work, 70, 80 hours a week. And before, those companies hired people at jobs that were paying on average of $30 an hour. You had a decent way of life. You had a weekend. You got a vacation. And you weren't exhausted every night when you went home. The whole work-life dimension is changing as well with what has been happening. America cannot cede this 21st century to places that are undemocratic. For example, if we take some of the new sectors that we are developing, you might be interested to know that one of the fastest growing professions in America, some say it is the fastest growing, is wind turbine technician. We are developing new technologies in the renewable energy sector that are employing many more than in the traditional sector. For example, there are now 6,000 solar jobs in Ohio. In Ohio, not California, I don't know what they have, but Ohio is 6,000, and which is double the number of jobs, well, actually more than double, about 2.5 times what we have in coal jobs in Ohio. And there is a great deal of activity, obviously in the natural gas sector in places like Ohio, where we have the Utica and Marcellus shale discoveries that are massive on the border of where Ohio and Pennsylvania meet. And we have an objective of becoming energy independent as a country, and Ohio is pulling forward in that great national enterprise. We have companies like First Solar in Ohio. However, due to hacking of their intellectual property and also efforts at hacking for money by certain countries, they have been the victim of dumping of panels on the global market, and they are in the process of trimming operations. They're making other adjustments across the globe in their manufacturing operations, but truly they are not playing on a level playing field. These are the jobs of the future, and industries our people are creating themselves. Despite all the obstacles, the creativity of America, the innovation of America remains the greatest in the world. And for many Americans, though they may feel hopeless against the tides of global economics that wipe out their potential and opportunity, they know that something's wrong politically, and we need to fix it here. And so therefore, in concluding, let me just tick off 3 very sort of summarizing what I've talked about. What do we need for congressional action? Number 1, we have an opportunity with renegotiating NAFTA as a model for addressing every new trade deal so America can compete fairly. We should ensure a compact that respects the rule of law and our founding constitutional principles, where every person matters, where there is a legal system to enforce in a timely manner any negotiation, where the rights of labor and corporations are duly protected, where the environment is safeguarded, and where phytosanitary standards are of Western mode. I think that those are actually achievable objectives under NAFTA because we're talking about Canada, the United States, and Mexico. And this is a definable space and one that we can keep working at a decent agreement. And one of the hidden aspects of NAFTA that I'll just, that's a better word for it, nasty, NAFTA, that most people haven't seen, but that is at the heart of our immigration debate in our country. When NAFTA was signed, prior to its signing, I worked very hard here in Congress with other colleagues to try to get a provision in NAFTA to accommodate the millions of Mexican peasants that would be thrown off their land. Not 100,000, not 500,000, millions. Millions of people. Their own country didn't care, and sadly, neither did the United States of America. And I can guarantee you, if you haven't traveled to an opera, go. Don't go to Cancun. Go to an opera and look at the work of NAFTA and study who's there and where they came from. Desperation causes people to do anything, to eat and to support their family. We could have avoided this. We chose not to. Those in charge, we tried to amend that agreement. It wasn't possible. So NAFTA's renegotiation provides an opportunity for us. Number two, we must enforce Buy American standards across the public sector and in any infrastructure bill that comes before us. And that'll be controversial, but we need to focus on that in view of what has happened to this country. Number three, we need to think creatively and look at examples like the auto industry's refinancing to think about how to provide bridge loans, perhaps to the steel industry as it repositions, and other fundamental industries that have been battered by international trade agreements. How about aluminum? To help them stabilize globally and to deal with domestic market fluctuations and reinvest simultaneously in our industrial base with all the serious national security implications some of these key industries represent. We figured out how to do it after 2008, and maybe we need to just be mindful of that as we move forward. Playing loose with American jobs and companies simply cannot stand. There's much to be done, and believe me, I look forward to working together with America's workers and companies of all sizes from across our heartland to the coasts on all sides, east, west, and south. You're part of that conversation, and you're here to help provide new opportunity to Main Street and to Wall Street. And we need attention from all parts of this. I rail against Wall Street all the time, and I hope some of you are from there. But the honest truth is that one of my predecessors here that I really respected a lot said one time, Marcey, every audience you go before, say to them, there's a difference between money and wealth. And if you understand the difference between money and wealth, you'll understand why manufacturing is important to this country. And though Wall Street made $170 billion record profits in 2016, that doesn't mean that all parts of the country have been made wealthy by their moneyed activities there. And so we need that reinvestment. We need people to be conscious of where wealth comes from as a country, and we need to be focused on wealth creation, not just money creation in our nation. Trade is a very important part of that. Manufacturing has created the greatest wealth that this country's ever had, in addition to agriculture, and we need to respect it, and we need to enliven it. Thank you so very much for being here today.